Job chapter 8, moving along here. Now, Job's taken 2 chapters to answer Eliphaz, and now Bildad the Shuhite's going to jump in. And, one of the things, it's surprising to me. You would think that Bildad would say, hey, man, Eliphaz, lighten up on this guy. Look what's happened to him. Don't you have any pity on him? You're really on him. No, Bildad, he just comes in and piles on. And there's something there that we saw during World War II in Nazi Germany and all over Europe. But remember, Job is a picture of that Jew. He is a picture of the Israelite. And many a Jew saw his neighbor turn on him. And when they got, the ones that survived and got out of the concentration camps, many times went back to the village or the town or the city where they lived and found their neighbor now living in their home. Many times it was the neighbor that turned them in. And you see something here, it's envy is what it is. A lot of people don't like Jews because they're envious of the fact that they're fairly successful people. You look at most of the scientists, movie stars, philosophers, bankers, doctors, they're Jewish. A good majority of them are Jewish, or a lot of them are Jewish. And so because they're successful, people get envious of them. And they conjure up things in their mind of how they want to be against them, and they follow this line of thinking that comes out of society to hate those Jews. I warn you against it. They may be enemies for the gospel's sake, but they're beloved for the Father's sake. And if you can, I'm not saying there's not some bad Jews. We talked about that. We called them bad figs, and that's true. There are some. But when you have the opportunity to bless a Jew, go ahead and do it. What's the worst that can happen? I tell this story that when Israel became a nation, I believe it was United Nations or League of Nations, whoever it was, when the group got together, the first 2 countries that recognized them, I think 6 minutes later it was United States, and then a few minutes later, the USSR, Russia, recognized Israel as a nation. They were second. You know who became the 2 world superpowers? And Russia was an atheist nation. You say, what did it? Well, you kind of got God over a barrel. He says, I'll bless them that bless thee. I'll curse them that curse thee. Well, Russia blessed them. What's God going to do? So when you get a chance to be a blessing to the Jews, or even to somebody it wouldn't hurt. You might get a blessing out of it. But Bildad he's getting ready to pile on here. He said, then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, how long wilt thou speak these things, and how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind? Wow. Doth God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes, and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. It said, well, if you just go crawling to him now and beg forgiveness, and if you were upright and pure of heart, I'm sure he would hear you. That's pretty rough, coming from somebody when you've got all these boils all over your body, you're sitting on an ash heap, and you're in a lot of pain. You can't sleep, you're having nightmares. And the only thing Job probably wants is just the comfort of some friends being there. And man, he calls them physicians of no value. If you can imagine just piling on. So Bildad comes out taking no prisoners. He attacks Job along the same lines as Eliphaz. He's going to say, it's got to be because there's something wrong with you, Job. God wouldn't have done this to you. And listen, I am going to agree with nearly everything that Bildad says. It's true. It's all true. It's just he kind of missed some things. You can be right and be wrong at the same time. Of how it's not so much what you know sometimes, but how you handle what you know. You could be right about something, but not have the right spirit about it, and you'll be totally wrong. And there are a lot of folks like that. Baptists are bad for that. Baptists are bad for rushing to judgment too soon. And that's exactly what Bildad does. He rushes to judgment too soon. He should have slowed down. But notice Bildad in verse 1, it says, then answered Bildad, I didn't know anybody was talking to him. I didn't know that Job was saying, hey, what do you think, Bildad? But Bildad answers. In fact, he can't wait to get in on the conversation. Here's this pitiful man on an ash heap has lost 10 children. Everything he has, his wife told him to curse God and die. And all he wants to do is die. And one of them just got done raking over the coals, and now the second one stands up and says, you know what? Eliphaz is right. So Bildad insults Job right off the bat with a reference to his words being a bunch of hot air, is what he's saying. Now notice in verse 3, okay? This is where he gets it right and wrong at the same time. He said, doth God pervert judgment? Or doth the Almighty pervert justice? The answer to that is absolutely not. God does not pervert justice. He does not pervert judgment. But maybe you don't know how this is going to unfold. Maybe you're too quick on it. Bildad, like Eliphaz, runs to God's defense. Some Christians just love to run to God's defense while they're condemning somebody else, and they don't know the circumstances. They don't know everything about it because they haven't waited. They haven't been patient. Instead of just praying about it, instead of just, Lord, I don't know. Honestly, they should have said to themselves, why, Lord? Why has this befallen this man? I'm not questioning what God did, but just questioning, not understanding why. They didn't. You know what Jesus Christ said to them? He said, which of you convinceth me of sin? What's my sin? Tell me. Did any of them say, Job, this is what you've done? They were throwing out things, but they had no idea what he did. He didn't do anything as far as sin goes. So Bildad, like Eliphaz, runs to God's defense, which can mean a rush to judgment. James 1:19, and I think we've covered this verse before. It says, James 1:19, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Just slow down with it. You could probably wait a little while longer before you pass judgment on somebody. I'm sure the Lord would be okay with you waiting just a little bit before you lower the hammer. Just slow down. You just don't know. A lot of times, I'll tell you what now, being a pastor, I hear a lot of things. I have people tell me things. I have husbands tell me one thing, wives tell me another about themselves. And until you get both sides of the story, you really don't know. And it will surprise you. You'll be in the camp of this poor person, this wicked individual over here, till you get the other side of the story, and then you're going, oh, not so poor. Maybe there's two sides to it. Job's trying to tell his side to it, and he's saying that, look, I don't know what I've done to deserve this. I don't know why God all of a sudden just tore my life to pieces. And he really doesn't know. Now, later on, some things come up that God has to deal with Job over. But compared to these three guys, Job is head and shoulders better than his friends. Sometimes, we condemn someone that we know is a better man than we are. Careful with that. So the answer to the question is, in verse 3, doth God pervert judgment or doth the Almighty pervert justice? The answer is, of course not. You're right, Bildad. You're right. Yet, let me ask you this. Look at verse 4. If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression. Again, now he's going after the kids again. He said, your kids must have been wicked for God to do this. Yet, we know from reading the book now, we know that God didn't cast away Job's children because of sin. What happened to Job's children was to prove a point to Satan. Wasn't that what it was all about? Hast thou considered my servant Job, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Touch all that, you can have all that he hath, but touch not his life. Didn't God give the devil permission to go after his children? What was the point of it? To prove to the devil, that man will not curse me. And he didn't. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Isn't that what he said? That really is the end of that little test. Wasn't little. That major test. That wasn't little, Lord. That major test was over with right then and there. I mean, at the end, when he took everything and then he touched Job's flesh, he did not rail on God. He did not curse God, but he was angry with God. And then from that point on, it's a whole different narrative. It's Job and his three friends and God wanting to perfect in Job something that needs some attention. We all have that. God usually doesn't go to the lengths that he went through with Job to try to bring up some dross, something that's impure to the top so that he can wipe it away. And usually that requires some heat. We know what it is. It's Job's self-righteousness. That's a secondary issue. It's going to be Job's self-righteousness, which is the issue that God has with the Jews even to this day. Why? They go about to establish their own righteousness. The more I learned about Jewish culture, they're pretty exacting about things. And they're pretty, I'm talking about the Orthodox Jews. They do a lot of strange things. I've heard that if they live here in the United States, and they can't go farther than a day's journey on the Sabbath, or I can't remember, but they run a line, actually run a physical wire around the city, and they can go anywhere within that wire, right? Kind of some strange stuff, that they do, but to them, they're keeping something that God wants them to keep, and they believe that because of that, they're righteous. Well, you can keep the law, and that's a certain level of righteousness, but you're still a sinner. And that's why God had concluded them all under sin, and said, for all have sinned to come short of the glory of God. Everybody gets saved the same way. Jew or Gentile, bond or free, everybody gets saved the same way in this age. And if they die without Jesus Christ, they go to hell just like anybody would. And that's just the truth of the matter. And they have that opportunity too. That witness is there. So, verse 5 and 6, notice he says there, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes. That word betimes doesn't mean many times, it means early. It means before. Times in the Bible always refers to 2 years. A time, a times, and a half a time. That's 3.5 years. So when he says betimes, he means before years. Before, that's why he tells you to chasten your son and your daughters. He said you're to discipline them betimes. Early. Before they're 2. Better start before they're 2. Talk about terrible 2s. It'll be incredible terrible 2. That's when you have to start training. You have to start discipline on a child before they're 2 years old. Betimes. It means just early. Don't let them get 4 and 5 years old and thinking, they don't understand. Yeah, they do. They understand. They understand when they're disobeying you. Look you right in the eye and disobey you. But he says, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. Well, and I think this is where Bildad rushes to judgment against Job, as if God was operating on Bildad's approved timetable. Isn't that what he's thinking? Bildad doesn't know it, but he is among the prophets like Saul. Because everything he's saying is going to come to pass, and yet he missed the entire thing. He says there, would he not awake for thee and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous? Does he not do that? Does God not make him prosperous? Doubles everything he has, right? Bildad's a prophet, man. But he gets it all wrong. I think sometimes we can be prophets and get it all wrong. In Job 1:5, he says, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes. Are you telling me that Job didn't seek God early? That's not what I read. In Job 1:5, it says, and it was so when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, talking about his children, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. That's not seeking God early. He was doing it long before this thing befell him. So I don't know what Bildad's talking about. Evidently, they don't know Job as well as they think they know him. They don't know the whole story. Because Job was seeking God early and continually and for his children. He says, if thou wert pure and upright. Man, that's the words of a Pharisee. As if Bildad was the measure of purity and uprightness. I mean, what does he know about it? Is he all that pure and upright? That he can recognize it when he sees it? If thou wert pure and upright? Well, how do you know he wasn't? Well, look what happened to him. You better be careful about that. God allows a lot of things to happen. And he allows bad things to happen to good people. You know, that's that whole thing, why do the righteous suffer? God allows things like that. And you don't know the end of that thing. You don't know what it's going to produce, and you got to be careful of how quick to judgment you are about it. Turn to Luke chapter 7, verse 39. The reason I said this is like the words of a Pharisee, it's just, that's how they behaved. In Luke 7:39, it says, now when the Pharisees which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. Now, this is, you'll find also this reference to the sinners of the Gentiles in it's either in 1st or 2nd Peter. Because the Jews have the law, walk within the law and everything, they didn't consider themselves like Gentiles. I mean, we were like dogs to them. Okay? And so they're kind of boasting that they're, a cut above. And notice how they're accusing him. They said, if he'd have known what manner of person this, like we know these things. Okay? In John 8:41, he says, ye do the deeds of your father. Then said they to him, we be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. Ooh. You think those Pharisees didn't know about Jesus Christ and the fact that Mary was pregnant before her and Joseph were actually hitched? And at the claim that, Joseph, the only thing Joseph would claim is, not my kid. It's the Lord's kid. I mean, that's what it is, wasn't it? But notice they don't believe that. Even though they've got a verse that says that a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Isaiah 7:14. I mean, they had a verse. They had the thing happen, and it happened according to a timetable in Daniel chapter 9. You know what they say to him? We be not born of fornication. That's that Pharisee for you. Quick to condemn, slow to kind of look the thing over and say, maybe I better just wait and not say anything. Now, the Pharisee, he would not even go into a Gentile building because he was so pure. In John 18:28, it says, then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Yet they murdered God's Son. That's how pure they were. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, we want to make sure we don't defile ourselves in that Gentile building. One of them Gentiles might touch us. We'll eat the Passover. We're pure. Then they kill God's Son. They murder him. Acts 7:52, he said, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? They have slain them which showed before the coming of the just one, of whom ye have been now the betrayers and murderers. Truth of the matter is, Job was a sight cleaner than his friends, and Job's manner proved it. You know our manners to prove that too. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5, it says, for our gospel came not unto you in word only, but also in power. You know, people have to be convinced of what you have. You can tell them all day long you're a Christian. If you don't live like one, you don't act like one, you don't talk like one, they're not going to believe you are one. Or they're just going to believe that you're just no better than they are, or no different than they are, should I say. But he said, for our gospel came not unto you in word only, but also in power and in the Holy Ghost and in much assurance, as ye know what manner of men we were among you for your sake. That's what the world wants to see. They want to look at your manners. I mean, I realize, I just don't want anybody to tell me what to do, or I just don't think I should have to, do this or that. Yes, you do. You do. You want to win people to God? You want people to know that they need to be saved? You have to live a certain way in front of them. That's part of being a Christian. You know that nearly everything God asks you to do is because of testimony? Because can a Christian not do basically anything he wants and still go to heaven? You might go bloodied, but you'll go. So why go through all this? I mean, why the tie? I keep asking that. Why this thing around my neck? Why? Because that's what people expect. They expect you to walk a certain way, dress a certain way. I mean, that's what they expect. And if you're the hypocrite, if you're living like they do, they think, well, you've got nothing different than me. See, maybe that's no skin off you, but it's their hide in hell. That's where it counts. It's not just, I'm going to do my own thing and I don't really care what anybody thinks. You better care. Because you could be condemning them to an eternal hell. Because they're watching. I can't tell you, I've had a couple phone calls, and this is before, one of them, I hadn't been saved a couple years, and I was riding around on my bicycle. I was only like 17, and I was riding around on my bicycle, and I would pass out tracts to kids in the neighborhood, and get to talk to some folks I grew up with. This is my neighborhood. And I led a few of them to the Lord, and I had a girl call me, and we had a school, Bear School, and she wanted to walk and meet me out at this school and would talk to me about something. When I went up there to talk to her, she said she wanted to get saved. Led her to Christ right there in the schoolyard. She called me. I've had it happen a few times. I've been standing there at the rest home, and preached a message, and a woman that just wasn't even, I don't even think she was there for the message, just walks up and said, I want to be saved. And I mean, she was of clear mind. She got saved. We've had people had a man show up and get saved at the rest home. Do I think I'm all that holy? No. Do I need to present myself as holy as possible? Yes. That's all there's to it. You're not trying to prove yourself some goody two-shoe. You're trying to keep people from perishing on your testimony. Because that's not what you want. So Bildad prophesies exactly what happens. You say, what did he get wrong? He got wrong the time element. He didn't give it time. He didn't let it kind of unfold. He rushed to judgment, and he judged a man guilty of eternal hell and destruction when he wasn't. He was just being disciplined. Now I realize, man, what happened to Job is far beyond what I would consider discipline. I think we would all have to agree that it was again, Job pictures that Jew. Do you know what God said about the Jew? Stiff-necked. He that hardeneth the neck, often being reproved, shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Some people just stiff-necked. That Jew, when he's wrong, he's wrong. I mean, he's wrong all the way. But when he gets right, he will be just as stiff-necked, just as rigid about it as when he's right with God. And they'll kill him wholesale. And that Jew will stand there and he'll hold to it. So that's how they are. And it's going to take a lot to convince Job that he's looking at this thing wrong too, of what's happening to him. And now these three friends it's kind of like the Lord's kind of sending in, Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar to kind of loosen him up, just trying to soften him up a little bit. Kind of a couple jabs here and there. Man, when the Lord steps in the ring with him, you just see Job just kind of just melt. Now, there's three distinctions between Christ's disciples and the Pharisees. Dr. Ruckman listed these. He said most of Christ's disciples were ordinary, uneducated, working men and women, ignorant fishermen. Now, I think that they may have known how to read. They may have just been ignorant of the Scriptures. I don't know, but I don't think they were all that dumb. But God chooses the from what I can tell, God chooses people like me. And he'll choose the bottom of the barrel. He'll choose, he'll choose someone that doesn't have any formal education. When I tell people I went through a Bible Institute, they go, oh, okay. To me, I went through one of the greatest institutions in the country. Outside of Dr. Ruckman's school, Charity Baptist Bible Institute was it. I was convinced of that. And but you tell somebody, you didn't graduate from one of these big colleges or whatever universities. You said, tell me what the little Bible Institute. They look at, oh, okay, well. Isn't that sweet? I applied over here to Cedarville to be to teach in their school. I wasn't given a second look because I didn't have, what's that theological institute? Huh? Dallas. If I'd have been Dallas Theological Institute, and graduated with a doctorate, I've got a master's degree in an institute. Oh, okay. That's all right. But most of Christ's disciples were ordinary, uneducated, working men and women. Now, some of them were, like Paul, formerly trained. A Pharisee of Pharisees, but look what he had to go through. Christ's disciples followed a man, not an institution or organization. It's true. Followed a man. You got to be careful about following the institution or the organization. Many churches went afoul because they followed a church or an institution, or an institution or an organization. 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, "Be followers of me as I also am of Christ." Now the key there is that as long as Paul is following Jesus Christ, you can follow Paul. You understand that? You just don't follow. Don't follow your pastor if he becomes a heretic. Okay, you ought to be able to know the difference. Don't follow him right off the cliff with the rest of them. That's why you got this. Okay, said it before. This is what keeps me right. This is what you have to make sure that I stay right. Christ's disciples were taught to minister the Word of God and the Holy Spirit to sinners. That's what he taught them. Minister, preach the Word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort, with all long suffering and doctrine. We're not told to minister a bunch of sacraments to a bunch of Roman Catholics. It's not what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to minister that book. That's what church is all about? We made it about a lot of things. But you know what church is about? What I'm doing right here, right now. That is what church is about. Show me any other thing in the book of Acts or even in the synagogues that's different from what I just said. We've added all those things. Some of those things are great to have. Notice our choir. Okay? We don't have one. Okay? If we did, everybody be up here, nobody be sitting there. I like to have some of the bells and whistles, but if we ever deviate from this, we've deviated from what church is about. And it's about ministering the Word, ministering the Spirit of God. Look at, I had a verse here. What do I do with it? Look at Galatians 3:5. Galatians 3:5. He therefore that that's hard to say. He therefore that ministereth to you the Spirit and worketh miracles among you, doeth he it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Now, I'm not going to do any miracles tonight. Not really feeling up to it. But I can minister the Spirit because I got the book. Jesus said, the words that I speak unto you, they are spirit, they are life. I can minister these words. Okay? That's what we're to do. Verse 7. He said, though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. Isn't that what happened? I said, he's a prophet. But I noticed something here. Though thy beginning was small. I don't know if that really identifies Job. Job was one of the greatest men of the East. He was the greatest man of all the men of the East. That's what the Bible says. So, who's Bildad talking about there? Maybe himself. That's good. That's good. Maybe it's Bildad that's got a very small beginning, and his latter end will greatly increase. Because Job had quite a bit. Now, I guess if you want to go back to when he first started, I guess you could say that, but from where we're going off where Job was, man, he's got an awful lot. He's the richest man in all the East. So I don't know, could there be a little envy in that verse? That if I can't have it, then you shouldn't have it? If I can't have what Job had, then he probably didn't deserve it. Because, hey, you got to look at me, humble beginnings. That's why I'm going to really make a big splash at the end. Well, Job is that exception. I mean, there's some truth to that, but with the Jews, you remember when they said, he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. I think he's talking about a little needle, by the way, than for a rich man to enter into heaven. They all jumped back and said, who then can be saved? A bunch of Jews talking. Who then can be saved, Lord? He said, well, with man, this is not, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And I told you how he'll work that thing out, right? If you can't take the mark of the beast, you're instantly poor. So he just took a bunch of rich Jews, and those that won't take that mark, guess what they will be? They'll be poor, knocking on people's doors, asking for a cup of water, asking for some help, asking for a visit to the jail, asking for clothing. And if that Gentile turns them down, he'll burn. That's how it is in the tribulation. You help out the Jew, it saves your soul. A little bit different than now. Just read Matthew 24:25. Verse 8. He said, for inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to search of their fathers. Now, there's some discussion and some, that this refers to the time of Moses to Joshua, which it doesn't. It's before Moses and before the time of Joshua. It's before then. And this is the time of Adam, Enoch, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that time frame. That's what he's talking about, the former age. And the reason you know that is because of how many times it shows up when he's talking about water in the book of Job. Let's look at a few verses here. Job 11:16. Job 11:16. Because thou shalt forget thy misery and remember it as waters that pass away. Now look at Job 12:15. Behold, he withholdeth the waters, and they dry up. Also he sendeth them out, and they overturn the earth. See that? He's talking about the former age. So that's how you know this thing happens. Job happens before Moses. Job 22, look at verse 15 and 16. Job 22, verse 15 and 16. Hast thou marked the old way which wicked men have trodden, which were cut down out of time, whose foundation was overflown with a flood? Talking about the former age. Look at Job 31:33. Now this is not about the flood, but this is about Adam. Job 31:33, if I cover my transgressions as Adam by hiding mine iniquity in my bosom. There you go. Referring to Adam. Now, turn back to Job 4:18. He's looking at that time, that former age. And what do we know about that? They all perished except for 8. So if you're going to talk to some fathers, it's going to be Shem, Ham, and Japheth, or Noah, and their descendants, because the rest of them are gone. They're dead. And what you find out is that you don't get away with sin. Eventually judgment comes and takes you out. In Job 4:18, behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. Now he's bringing up what happened in Genesis 6. Talks about Adam, talks about those angels in Genesis 6, and talks about that flood in Genesis 7 and 8. He said, you want to go back and check with the fathers? Go back and, you say, how are they knowing all this? It's being passed down. They're being told. They're being told the stories. Now, when Moses comes along, he writes the first 5 books of the Bible and commits that record to writing. But Job knows about it. His friends know about it. Why? Well, I don't know how long after this is, but it's not that long after the flood. When they're talking to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I don't know what the lifespan. What you've got is that lifespan, and I'm not good at this stuff, but that lifespan was like 900 years, and after the flood, changed everything as far as the earth and the tilt and the atmosphere. You got what am I trying to say? That stuff comes from outer space. Cosmic rays, cosmic radiation. You've got all kinds of things bombarding you that they may not have had before that. And as a result, the lifespan of man, his longevity, begins to fall off very quickly. Look what he says here in verse 9. For we are but of yesterday and know nothing, because our days upon earth are a shadow. Okay. What he's saying there is they that don't study history are condemned to repeat it, and we're not even being around long enough to learn everything we need to know. Why? Well, Methuselah was 965 years old. How old do you think these guys are? They don't even live to be 200. I think we figured out Job, his lifespan, and he's one that got some longevity, was about 200 years old. If he was 40 or 50 years old, he had 10 children fully grown. Okay? 10 children fully grown. Then the thing happens where he loses them, he loses wealth, and then God restores it and he lives another 140 years, I believe it is. Okay? 200 years. And what Bildad is saying, and it's so, he says, well, we're not even living about 150 years at the most compared to these guys that live 900. He goes, our life's like a shadow. Well, what is it now? It's a vapor now. A shadow hangs around for a little while. Now we're just a vapor. We got 1/10 of the lifespan or the longevity that they had in the beginning. Not even 1/10. Talk about things going quick. And you know what we can know? We can't know a lot of things that those guys... Okay, let me ask you something. If you lived 900 years, what could you become a professional in, you know? You could be an ironsmith or whatever, or blacksmith, that's what I was trying to think of. A blacksmith, you could be a goldsmith, a silversmith, you could be a bricklayer, you could be a carpenter. Come on now, how long would it take you, 25 years to master something? You could master think about even Noah, 500 years old or something. Just think about how long that is and all the things that they would know. You could take the village idiot, he'd be smarter than us because just he lived life for 900 years or 500 years. I mean, he'd be, just by default, he would be smarter than us. Even if it took 500 years for him to learn his lesson. Okay? He says, we are but of yesterday and know nothing. Not compared to what them guys would have known. Plus, you got them angels fooling around coming down here, and that probably added some technology. They found batteries in Egypt that they found where they used them to plate metal. I mean, they've found all kinds of things. Concrete was around before. I mean, Rome was making good concrete, and then it kind of disappeared and showed up later on. I mean, we've lost some of the things you think we just thought of, they already had. And there's no, well, the Lord had some things too. That Urim and Thummim is kind of interesting. There's some things back there. But the Lord was so far ahead of technology when he's telling them Jews what to do. But anyway, verse 10, it says, shall not they teach thee and tell thee in other words out of their heart? He's talking about the fathers, the forefathers, who had to be the ones that survived the flood. But he's not referring to Moses and his writings. They don't exist yet. They're the word of mouth account